these departing visions every day.
Me too.
And in my clinical practice, what's funny is that people will come in and they'll talk about relationship problems and parenting problems, and then they'll have some unresolved grief. And then we start talking, and they look at me and they say, I have a job, I'm responsible, I have teeth. And then they'll proceed to tell me about how they had some experience where there was one guy who had the experience of seeing his wife coming down the stairs, followed by sparkling light.
Oh.
And she came to the door, just to the door of his hospital room. And he looked and he suddenly moved from death phobic to, wow, this is really cool. We live in a death phobic society.
Right.
The following generations, parents our age don't talk about these sorts of things. They don't talk openly about these sorts of things. And so we have a bunch of people who are getting plastic surgery when they're 16, and there's just a horrible fear of death.
Yes,
so,
totally unnecessary. You're right.
But when they have a departing vision, and they don't have anybody to talk to be honest, when they have these experiences. And so they just table them, put them away. And so it's not untypical for them to show up in my office and talk about everything under the sun, and then share about an after-death communication, which is contact with a deceased loved one after the fact. I had a woman who I know we had a serious, a woman friend of mine was stabbed and she died a couple of weeks ago. She was murdered.
My.
Yeah.
Oh my. I'm sorry.
And so, yeah, I know. She was quite the character. But people are so overwhelmed with emotion about her passing that if they did have deathbed visions, well, they're not going to really be able to sort that out. So what'll happen for me is I've had the departing visions with my mother. I've had departing visions with my grandmother and my sister who died 6 months ago. We were in Carolina. We have a little cabin way up in the mountains, and it was the day after Christmas. And that night, I had a dream of my sister. She was dressed exactly as how she would be. She had a backpack, tan backpack over her shoulder. Her hair was a mess. She was just herself. And she said to me, "Okay, I'm going now." That's all she said.
Isn't that lovely? Oh, isn't that lovely?
So I woke up and I told my husband about it. And that day she passed. So, yeah.
Let's talk about what we're talking about now. I mean, these are really two different phenomena. Deathbed visions happen to someone who is at a deathbed. Now, they sometimes are shared. And in fact, Raymond Moody wrote a book called Glimpses of Eternity, which came out in 2010, I think, where he talks about shared deathbed visions. I recommend it strongly. But there's another thing which happens, which is these departing visions that Carla had of her mother, that she had of her friend or her sister. This is very, very common. And I just, in case, so it doesn't freak you out if it happens to you. Usually you'll see the person. Very often they're only waist high. There's nothing below the waist, or sometimes it's just a bust. But they always look happy. And they always say, usually they're silent, I think. I don't know. What's your experience? Do they talk always? Or my experience has been they're mostly silent.
Well, I had experience with my mother that was a shared departing vision. And I was at a rock concert. I was very, very young. And I think it was Sly and the Family Stone. And I guess Sly had to have a few more hits of whatever he was smoking. And so when he finally came out, the heat was high and it was like people were miserable. And so I felt all of a sudden really, really miserable. I went from feeling perfectly fine to suddenly having chest pains and feeling just not well at all. So I went to the ambulance that was on the grounds, and I asked them if I could crawl in the ambulance because I just felt awful. And so the attendant said, sure. And so I slept through the whole conference. When I woke up and got home, I found out that at the exact moment my mother was being loaded into an ambulance, and that she was in massive pain. And so I didn't know what to do with that, because I didn't know that was a shared departing vision.
Yes,
and so, there are instances. Yeah, there are lots of instances, and a lot of the books, the historical books about, one, I know you know about this one woman who was passing, and she didn't know her sister was passing too. But then just before she passed, she said, why is she here, her sister?
Yes.
And yes, that's kind of, and so.
Yeah, that's I think from Sir William Barrett's book.
Yeah, it is.
I think it's from Sir William Barrett's book.
Oh, it's Daisy. I think her name was Daisy.
You would have one-upped me by remembering the name. I haven't read it in decades, but I remember that one. I think it's important that everyone understand how normal these things are. You'll notice they're happening when people don't expect them. It happens in an ordinary course. If one happens to you, don't be afraid. It's always a message of love. Always. And my particular interest this time is in those deathbed visions, which I think it's very important we all understand happen universally. It's part of everybody's death experience, provided that they don't, die in their sleep. And I have come to understand that I think the reason why it happens, and your book would help me figure this out, is because we are as clueless as we leave our bodies as we were when we left our mother's womb. We have no idea what's going on, and we can't find our way by ourselves. And so those who love us will come in order to help us raise our vibration right away and go to where we're going to go. And that's the reason they happen. They send for us the people or the one person or the pet who is more likely to be the one we would trust and would follow. And I think that's actually what happens, but it's fascinating. I'd just like to finish talking about quickly deathbed visions. These are universal. If you see a person who is dying, maybe just looking, they stop talking usually to the living when these begin, and they're just gazing up at the corner of a room. They're talking in their mind with people that they can see, but you can't. It's just an extraordinary thing. And there's one that happened a long time ago. In fact, it happened in 1826. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both were major founding fathers. We know their names. And curiously, they both died on the same day. They died on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1826. Jefferson died in the morning. Adams died in the afternoon. And, of course, they were so far apart, one in Virginia, one in Massachusetts, they didn't know what the order was going to be, but they knew they were both near death, and they were very good friends by then. And early in the afternoon, John Adams was lying, really almost moribund, about to die, and suddenly he spoke his last words. His last words were, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." Why would he say that? Why? Well, Jefferson had died in the morning. And so what would he do but to go immediately to the bedside of his dear friend and help to take him home? That is a true case of a deathbed vision, but nobody understood it until we came to understand about deathbed visions early in the 20th century. Is that a neat story?
Oh, I love that story. I included it in my last book. The two of them had differences too.
Oh, yes. They went through a period where they were politically estranged, but that ended.
Yes.
Both retired. Yes.
Yeah, but it's funny that, after all of that, then one comes to get the other. They kind of crack me up.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing, and it's what Jefferson would have done too. He was naturally a very loving man. But all right, let's talk about what other kinds of spiritually transformative experiences there are. I mean, we know about near-death experiences, but frankly, those are relatively rare compared to these much more common kinds of experiences.
Oh yes, they are, and that's what really gets me is that these departing visions I've received. Information from people around the world who have sent me their departing visions or after-death communications. And the volume of people who have these experiences on a regular basis, because our society is so death-phobic and nobody's going to speak up.
Right.
Physicians have actually, they have actually, turned away and walked out and ordered more antipsychotic drugs for people who have these experiences and share them.
Yes.
And so when it comes to the after-death contact, that's something that's even more unnerving for people because they used to call such experiences hauntings or ghosts or this or that. And the bottom line is it's just a spirit. It's a spirit person coming back to visit.
And coming back out of love, too. This is a loving thing you're doing.
My mother came back in a dream, and I was sitting on top of a hill. The hill was covered with flowers, unusual colors, and I saw somebody climbing up this hill. And as she got closer, I realized it was my mother. And she came and she sat down, and we had a conversation. I don't know what it was about. And then we hugged, and then she got up and went back down the mountain. And I remember feeling the thing about these experiences is that they will imprint upon us. They will be things that we remember for the rest of our lives.
Oh, absolutely.
We don't remember when we go and get more milk or something like that. But this is something that is so powerful, we'll remember it. Now, near-death experiences, I had one when I was in the hospital, and those are very, very interesting because I didn't see it. Well, I did see a tunnel. I just didn't go in it. And I heard the voice of some sort of higher power, but I didn't see who it was. And then I noticed that the room across from me was full of people who were reuniting. And it was a fascinating experience. And while I was having this experience, of course, nobody knew.
No.
Nobody knew that I was seeing my uncle and my grandfather and my mother at the head of the tunnel that was golden in color. Now, people do have experiences where they leave their bodies and they go through a tunnel and they go towards a light. And those accounts can be found even online, and they're very interesting. And so for people who have issues with death and dying, I always say, go online and just plug in afterlife communication or departing visions or near-death experiences and just start reading. And what's interesting is some of them say, well, I'm scared. And so I tell them, you have nothing to be afraid of. Once you start getting some knowledge about this, you're going to feel so relieved.
And the important thing to understand is that consciousness is all that exists. It exists in a range between fear at the lowest vibration, love at the highest. So the more you can get rid of fear, the more you're going to grow spiritually. Fear is a barrier to spiritual growth. So if you have any fear of death at all, then you've got work to do just for your own well-being, for your own mental and spiritual health. Because it's easy, as Carla says, it's easy to get rid of the fear of death. I look forward to death like you would not believe. But, I got to stay a while longer. I have work to do, but I certainly don't fear the moment when it comes. It'll be Christmas and my birthday. And you can get to that point. I was once afraid of death, too. But what's important for everybody to understand about the wonderful dream you had, it might be a simpler dream. The difference between a dream visitation and every other visitation, as Carla points out, is that normal dreams fade by lunchtime. I mean, I hardly remember them until after, I brush my teeth. But a dream visitation, I've only had 2 in my life, they last forever.